Okay, so we're going to load, pass, and unload a scalpel blade. Now, ideally, you would use a scalpel blade that's disposable and protected like this. These are not always available in the hospitals, so most of the time you're going to use a disposable blade on a reusable, sterilizable handle. Now, to load the blade, you're not going to grab the blade itself with your fingers. You're never going to touch the blade itself with the fingers. You're going to instead use a needle driver. Now, to cover the parts of the blade that we have the fenestration, or the hole. Fenestration is the big fancy term for the hole. We have the sharp part of the blade around the curve on this side, and then we have the back of the blade back here. Where we're going to grab the blade with our needle driver is going to be in the back side, not on the front side, not on the sharp side, because if you grab it from the sharp side, that can actually dull the blade itself, and it's not going to cut as well. So we're going to grab the blade from the back side in this flat area away from the fenestration, away from the hole. If the blade happens to be laying on a towel, which is not the best position, but if it's there, it is possible to sort of scoop under the blade with the needle driver and pick it up in this fashion. Ideally, however, the blade would be over here in the magnetic part of your needle book. So to get this out of here, you're not going to be able to get under this blade if it's in the magnetic part with your needle drivers. So we're going to pick it up by putting one of the clamps of the needle driver into the fenestration, and we're going to lay it over the edge of the needle book itself. This is going to give you a little bit of room to get under the back of that blade and pick it up with your needle driver. Now, looking at the handle, we have a couple of important parts. You have this beveled area here, this raised area. Notice that there's a notch right here at the edge. On the back side, there's no notch. It's smooth. On the front side, on the top side, there is a notch. That's the side that you're going to hold to the top. So that notch right here needs to be at the top. Then along the shaft, you have a groove. There's a little groove in there, and it is into that groove that the inside edge of that fenestration, of that hole in the blade itself, is going to slide into that groove. So to load the blade, I'm going to again grab it with the needle holder from the back side, holding again away from the sharp edge and away from the fenestration, away from that hole. I'm going to take the tip of the handle and insert it from the underside into the fenestration, but only part way, only to the point where the groove lines up with the inside of that fenestration. And then with the narrow part of that fenestration lined up with the grooves, I'm going to pull together and slide the blade down over that little notch that's sticking up. Did you hear that click? That click is the back of the blade snapping down over the back of that notch. That tells you that it's loaded and securely in place. So once the blade is loaded, it's now time to pass it to the surgeon when she asks for it. Now ideally, you'd use a neutral zone to pass the blade. It's much safer that way. But most of the time, we're going to end up using the old-fashioned method. Now when I do this, I have to hold the blade in a certain way, and I'm going to use not the ridges themselves. The ridges belong to the surgeon. So I'm going to hold past the ridges in this little blank space between the ridges and the blade. That's where I'm going to put my index finger and my thumb. Now these fingers that are sticking out here, they're going to go slightly over the blade itself, protecting the blade so that as I'm moving it around, I'm not going to accidentally hit anything with the blade. So this is the proper way to hold a blade before you pass it. Now when the surgeon asks for it, I'm going to take the blade and I'm going to insert it this way. Now watch what happens. Her fingers line up exactly with the ridges, which is where they should be, and I'm going to take the back of the blade and rest it into the meaty part of her hand. That way I know she has a good grip on it, and now I can release it. So at the end of the case, we're going to have to take the blade off of the handle so that we can dispose of the blade and keep and re-sterilize the handle. Now there are a lot of cool gizmos out there that'll help you take the blade off the handle safely, but these cost a little bit extra and most hospitals don't like to spend that extra money, so we're probably just going to end up doing it the old-fashioned way. So to do this, we're now going to grab, instead of up here, we're going to grab behind the notch, in this little area here behind the notch, again on the back side of the blade, so the sharp side is facing that way. We're going to grab right here, and then we're going to gently lift up. We're not going to use a lot of force to lift this up. We're just going to gently lift this up so that the back side clears that notch. So it clears that little bevel and it goes up above it. Then what you'll see most people do is they use their shoulders and their arm strength, and I'm going to point it down at my needle book for safety reasons, and you'll see why. And then they're going to force it off. Now when you do that, the blade sort of shoots off in a direction and sometimes is going to hit down here. Now when you're doing this, you don't want to be up here and accidentally aim this at your surgeon or your circulator, because when it flies off, you could accidentally stab them. They're not going to like you so much, and there's going to be some paperwork involved, so don't do it that way. That's why I always aim it down at my needle book, so that if it does fly off in a direction, it's going to hit down here where it's much safer. But using this method uses the muscles of the arms, the muscles of the shoulders, to pull the blade off. And that creates a lot of force, which then tends to go flying because your entire arm is going flying. So I actually prefer a different way of doing it, which I think is a little bit safer. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to grab again the back of the blade behind the notch, and I'm going to use my thumb, not my arms, not my shoulders, but just my thumb to push against the needle driver itself. Watch that again. I'm going to grab it behind, lift up, and using my thumb, push the blade off the handle. This way it doesn't go flying. Now it's probably a good idea to also still do this over your needle book. So I'll do that again. Here it is, lift up, and use my thumb to push the blade off. It's a much more controlled removal of the blade.